So in this exercise, we're going to go over how to make a date and a time appear on a page using just HTML and JavaScript. And so if you've pulled down this repository already, I've given you a few starter files, but some of the things that we're going to be covering in these exercises is talking about what is the document or the DOM and how do we interact with it, how do we get elements that are in it, using IDs to get those elements and changing their text content, setting up a date and using the functions that are involved in that, a few different operators, and then creating our own functions and using those and acting upon them. So those are a few things that we're going to cover. We have a few files that are already in the project, and over here on the right side of my screen I've actually got Atom open, and if you want to use Atom, just go to atom.io and you'll be able to download your copy there, so you can install it yourself if you'd like to use this same one. So we've pulled down this repository already. I've got it open up in my folders, and I'm actually going to show this in Finder a minute so that you can see what it would look like. So here is my folder, and in here I'm going to just click on index.html, and that automatically opens it in my default browser. So we can see what our index file is starting with. And if I click on it here, I've got it open in Atom now. So I can see I have a few files that we've already started with in our repository. We have our HTML file, we have our scripts.js file, and that's where our JavaScript is going to go. And then we also have a stylesheet.css file, and that's just any styling that I've used to override. What we actually have going on with our styling is we went ahead and used Bootstrap as our default to just start with. It just gives us a nice clean slate, gives a clean look, and gives us some styling that we can just go ahead and capitalize on. And then we just use our own style sheet to just override anything that we want to change. So this is just a good way to start, especially if you're not familiar with styling in HTML. It gives you some good starter stuff. The parts that we actually really care about here are going to be this little bit here. We've got a couple of headers, and I've got some classes applied to them just to apply styling, but really what we're going to be using are these IDs, and they're going to be making things happen. And then we've also got down here in the bottom of the file, I like to import my JavaScript files at the very bottom, because this allows for the entire HTML page to load first. When a browser is rendering a web page, it's going to read it from the top to the bottom. And if I let my page render all the way down to the bottom before loading my JavaScript, this ensures that any elements that I'm acting on in my JavaScript are loaded on the page. So that's why I'm loading my scripts file at the very end. Now, if we look at this, we notice that in our HTML file, it's got a date here, but in our browser, it has hello world. So let's go ahead and open up our scripts file. And I'm going to slide this over just a little bit more so you can see it a little better. So we can see we actually have one script already running here. And what it's doing is it's looking at our document. And what the document is, or you'll hear it referred to as the DOM, the Document Object Model, that document is what our browser is loading. So index.html is a document in our browser. So whenever we see the word document, that's what it's referring to, is this HTML document over here. And what it's doing is it's using this built-in function that JavaScript has called getElementById. And if you're familiar with HTML, you know that elements can have this property called ID, and we can set those IDs to whatever values we want, as long as it's a string. And so we've got one here called current date. So we have our document, and we're getting an element by ID, and we're searching for one with an ID called current date. And what it's doing is it's setting the text content for that ID, for that element, to hello world. So if I actually comment this out, this means that this line of JavaScript is no longer going to run once I save this file. That's what commenting out does. I'm going to hit save. And this does not have a hot reload set up. This is very basic, so we have to actually refresh the page ourselves, which you can do with your reload button in your browser, or you can do, on my Mac, it's Command R. Okay? And so now you can see that our index page has actually gone back to the original content that it had. So you can see that this little line of script that we have already in our scripts file can run and act on the page already. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a date and have that fill in where we have hello world. So in order to do that, we actually need to create a date. And JavaScript has something built in called date. And this is how you would create it, is you would just change that hello world string. And we know it was a string because we had quotation marks around it. We change it to new date. So let's go ahead and save that and see what that looks like. All right, so this is something. It's a little bit weird to look at. It's not a very user-friendly format for the date, but it is a date. And this is how the JavaScript date is, how it comes. Now there are some really nice things that are built in that we can use to get some different strings to help us out here. So let's actually create a few constants that we can use to see what we've got in this date string. So let's actually make our new current date. Let's make that a constant here. And const is for constant. And we use const because this is a value that we're not going to change. Once we set current date, we have no reason to change that later. It is not a variable. It never varies. The value stays the same. So we're using const because of that. All right. Now, let's say we want to find the month. So let's create a variable, a constant called month. And what we can do is we can take our current date, that's the variable, the constant that we defined right up here, and this is a date. And date comes with some functions built in. And there's one called getMonth. And if you Google date like this and maybe throw in the word JavaScript, you'll be able to find lots of information on things you can do with this. If you go to Stack Overflow, there's going to be lots of questions and things that you can look at to get your own examples. So let's get our month. Now we haven't actually done anything with this yet, but let's actually take this line that we had at the top, because this is already getting our current date element. And instead of setting it to the new date, let's set it to month, just so we can see what that looks like. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to reload my page. Okay, so now I've got this number 9, and now you're thinking, okay, well, what does the number 9 have to do with it? Because if you remember earlier, that date was rendering with October, and October, well, that's the 10th month of the year, so that's very interesting. Now what's happening is date stores the months in an array, and if you're familiar with arrays at all, you'll know that the first position in the array, the first item in the array, is designated not with a 1, but with a 0. So the number 9 is the 10th position in an array, but 9 is the label given to it since we start with a number 0. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make an array with the month names. So let's call it month names, and these variable names, constant names, are really up to you. As long as it's a string and starts with a letter, you can name it pretty much whatever you want. Camel case is a pretty good way to go, which means that each word has an uppercase letter to help kind of denote what it is, rather than using dashes. So I'm going to go with camel case here, and we can talk about that more in a different exercise. But anyways, we're going to create an array, and an array is denoted by these square brackets. And in my array, I'm going to list all of the months. Now the first month of the year is January. And we're going to just list them straight on through. So I'm going to just go ahead and type these out a minute. And you can be typing along so that you can also have all of this information, because hopefully you will be making this at the same time. And finally, December. Okay, so that's an array of all 12 months. and October is in the 10th position, which in an array is going to be used by the number 9. Okay, now we want to actually set a string that we can use this in. So let's make a new constant, and we're going to call it date string. And we're going to use this to kind of build a readable date that's a little bit easier to look at. And we now have our array called month names. And the way that you can access a value inside of an array is by putting a number inside of the square brackets right next to that variable name. And so if I use 0, I'm going to get January. So let's actually test this out. So I'm going to move this down to the bottom again. We're going to keep getting that element, that same element, and instead of setting it to month, we're going to now set it to our date string. Save that. And remember, I'm hard coding in month 0 right now. So we should expect to see January because that's the first position and the array starts with value 0. All right, great. We've got January in there, and if I were to change it to 10, I would expect to see November. Refresh, there's November. Okay, now what we want to do though is we want to have our current date. And so if you'll remember, when we just used month, which is set up here, this is our month, which get month gives us a number. When we try displaying just our month, we have a number value. So what we can do with that is instead of hard coding in a number, we can use our variable, our constant that we set, and use that to call the current month. And then we're going to go ahead and display date string instead. All right, so I've saved that. I'm going to go ahead and reload, and I expect to see the word October now. Great. Okay, so we've got our month. Now, let's go ahead and get a few more things in here so that our user can have a little bit more information. All right, let's go with the day. Let's do that one next. So we can take our current date dot get date. Okay, that's a little bit redundant, but that's going to be our date, our actual day of the month. And so what if we just do day here now? We should expect to see whatever day it is today. All right, today's the 25th. That is correct. It is actually the 25th today. So good. That's good. Let's go ahead and go back to our date string. Now, how do we make our date string include not only the month, but also the day? All right. I like to put the day in the front. It's more international friendly, I guess, just my preference. But I'm going to do day plus month. And right now, what this is doing is this is building a string with the value from my constant day and the value that we get from using this month names array and passing it the value from month. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Go ahead and save, reload. All right, 25 October. All right, there's no space here, and that's because we didn't tell it to put a space. This is not a word processor. JavaScript is just going to do exactly what you tell it, and if you don't tell it to put a space, that's what it's going to do. So let's go ahead and add a space. So you can see that this plus, which is normally for addition if you're doing math, is also a string operator that can concatenate these strings together. So now we have day, space, month. Okay, save that, reload. There we go. Now we've got our space. All right. We need one more thing here to make this a full date. Let's get our year. So we take our current date that we remember we set up above, and we can do get. The thing you want to do here, you could guess get year. We're going to do get full year, and that's going to give us our 4-digit year. Now to build our date string, remember we want a space in there, and then we're going to go ahead and add our constant for year. And there you have it.